They thought it was cute that my uncle called me his helper at wakes, but no one knew that. Behind the locked door, he played with women's bodies and made me look at everything without blinking. My name is Lorraine Ellington. I'm 82 years old and I'm from Lexington, Kentucky. And if you've come here thinking you're going to hear yet another sad old lady story, you can prepare yourself. What I'm about to tell you, nobody likes to hear, but they have to. They thought it was cute that my uncle called me his helper at wakes, but nobody knew that. Behind the locked door, he played with women's bodies and made me look at everything without blinking. I remember when my mother fell ill. The illness came on dry, fast, the kind where you don't have time to understand what's going on. One month, she was sweeping the yard. The next, she couldn't get out of bed. They said it was something wrong with her lungs, but no one could explain it properly. It was just coughing and coughing, sheets wet with sweat, and my grandmother making tea with everything from the garden. My father had disappeared years before, left on the promise of a job, and never came back. So, when the going got tough, it was my mother's younger brother who came up with the solution, Uncle Hank. He was the only one in the family who had stability, as they used to say. He was the owner of Ellington's Memorial Funeral Home, respected in the city, always dressed in a dark suit with a beard and a calm voice. The kind of guy everyone greets in the street with 2 fingers in his hat and a forced smile. But at home, between 4 walls, he was nothing like that. "Lorraine's a clever girl," he said one Sunday, sipping coffee in our kitchen, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "If you want, you can help me with the work, earn a few bucks and learn a trade." My mother, thin as a feather, nodded with the deep eyes of someone who no longer had the strength to argue. And that, my dear, is how I started going to the funeral home every day after school. The first week was normal, at least in anyone's eyes. I helped to mop the floor, arrange the flowers, and clean the benches. Uncle Hank let me organize the flyers with the names of the deceased. I thought it was beautiful at first, seeing how people came to say goodbye, crying, hugging each other. I stayed in a corner, watching everything in silence. But then the first girl arrived. I remember her name to this day, Susan Hamilton. She was 26 years old, blonde with a calm face. She almost looked like she was asleep. She'd been in a car accident. Her body arrived in a black bag, and her uncle called me to see what it was like inside, saying that it was important for me to learn. "There's no need to be afraid. Death is just another process," he said, with that tone he used for everything, like someone explaining a cake recipe. I went. I was scared, of course, but I went. Because if I said no, he'd look at me like that. And I had already learned, even without anyone teaching me, that certain things you don't answer. In the preparation room, he put on his gloves, turned on the bright lights, and unzipped the bag. I was shaking inside, but I tried to keep a straight face. He gave me a stool and told me to sit in the corner. "Just watch today. Later, you'll help me with simple things," he said. But what he started to do there wasn't simple. And it wasn't even part of the job. I knew that for sure the second I saw his eyes change. He didn't speak. He just did. His every movement was too slow, as if he was enjoying himself. The way he touched her, adjusted her dress, wiped her face. Something was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I felt a chill in my stomach that had nothing to do with fear of death. And then he stopped, turned to me and said, "It's going to be our secret. Okay?" I didn't answer. I just shook my head. And that day, for the first time, he locked the door. At the time, I didn't even understand why. Why lock it? Nobody ever went in there anyway. But when I saw what he started doing after that, I understood, and I wish I hadn't. When he'd finished, he turned off the light, gave me a chocolate, and told me I'd been very brave. I accepted because my body was too frozen to refuse. The taste of the candy was bitter, and it wasn't the chocolate. I came home with sweaty hands, my clothes smelling of formaldehyde. My mother asked me if everything was all right. I smiled, because if I didn't smile, she'd see. And if she saw, she would ask. And if she did, what was I going to say? From that day on, nothing was the same. And what's worse, that was just the beginning. If this story has already gripped you, my dear, stay with me, because the next part is even heavier. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and if you can, leave a like. I didn't sleep that night. I closed my eyes, but the image of the girl's body, the way he touched her, kept going round and round in my head as if it had been tattooed on the inside of my eyelid. Every time I tried to forget, the smell came back. That mixed smell of formaldehyde, old flowers, and something else rotten. And his face, my God, that look on his face, as if none of it was wrong. The next day, my mother asked me if I'd had a nightmare. I said it was just a stomach ache. She was already so weak that she could barely stand up. She just said, "Go with God, child," and closed her eyes again. Every day she seemed less alive. I felt that she was going away, little by little, and that when she was gone for good, I would be alone with him. That was the part that scared me the most, even more than what I had seen. At the funeral home, nothing had changed. The routine went on as if the world outside didn't exist, and he was already different to me. He looked at me in a way he hadn't before, longer, more evaluating. He started calling me for more things. He said I was special, that not everyone had the stomach for it. And I believed him, because it was better to believe than to think I had no way out. One afternoon, another woman's body arrived. He called me with a short gesture, without even saying his name. And this time, he told me to help. He told me to get a clean cloth and wipe my face, as if I were wiping someone asleep. My hands were shaking so much that the cloth almost fell off. He came up behind me, held my hand above his, and stayed like that, guiding me, for a few minutes that seemed like forever. His mouth even touched my hair. And that's when I realized that what he was doing wasn't just with the dead. From that day on, he started closing the door every time, even when there was no one in the building. And he began to invent that I needed lessons, that what I saw was part of the preparation. He said it was like medicine, that doctors also trained on bodies. But it wasn't like that, and I knew it. I knew it from the way he looked at those women's skin, as if they were dolls, and the way he spoke to me, calling me my little helper, with his hand too heavy on my shoulder. I started making excuses for being late for school. I pretended I had extra work, a meeting, anything, but it was no use. He would pick me up by car. He'd tell me that Mom needed help, that I had responsibilities, and I'd go quietly, with an aching stomach, because if I said no, he'd close his face, and when he got serious, the air around him got too heavy. Once in the car, he said, "You're my flower of mourning." No one understands death as much as you do. It wrapped me up inside. I looked at the window and pretended not to hear, but I did. I kept it word for word because deep down I knew that one day I would have to remember everything, to tell it, or to try to explain to myself why I couldn't get out. At that time, I began to notice that he only did that with women's bodies. The men he treated with haste. He never called me, he just cleaned, sewed, bandaged, and that was that. But when it was women, then he had time. He wanted to prepare it well, he would say. He would spend hours. And he made a point of having me there. Sometimes he'd have me read the name of the card out loud. "Say her name, Lorraine, so we can give her the respect she deserves." And after I'd read it, he'd do anything but respect it. Worst of all, I started to get used to it. Not that I accepted it, but your body learns to switch off. I'd go there, do what it told me, and then forget about it. I'd bury everything in a dark corner of my head. The problem is that one day that dark corner overflows. And when it overflows, it comes all at once. One day, a woman came in still warm. She had recently died. She was young, must have been in her 30s, with brown hair and a small tattoo on her wrist. I remember this because I read everything in her file, and that day he wouldn't let me see it. He just said it was a delicate case and told me to wait outside. But the door didn't lock properly. It just leaned against it. And through a small gap, I saw the way he bent over his body, the way he mumbled things, as if he were talking to her, as if he expected her to answer. And then I saw his hand. I won't describe it, but it was at that moment that I knew he wasn't going to stop, not with the dead, not with me. I ran to the funeral home bathroom, locked myself in, and threw up everything. I cried quietly, just the tears coming down and my chest hurting like it was going to explode. When I got back, he pretended nothing had happened. He gave me a glass of water and asked if I was ill. I said it was just nausea. He smiled. He said it was normal at that age. When I got home, my mother was worse. She wasn't talking anymore. She was delirious. She called my father, who didn't even remember who he was. She hugged me weakly and said, "You'll be strong, child. You always have been." I almost collapsed. I almost told her everything. But I looked at her and realized that there was nothing more she could do for me. And that hurt more than anything. That night, I stared at the ceiling in the bedroom, trying to think of someone, anyone I could tell. But I had no one. The teachers at school barely noticed me. The neighbors spoke badly of my mother, saying she let her daughter loose too much. And my uncle, he was Ellington, the man about town. Who was going to believe me? So I kept going, every day, my heart heavy, my soul scratched, and a growing desire to disappear. But something deep inside me told me that I couldn't, that I needed to see how far he would go, that I needed to see how far he would go, that someday it would all come back. And it did, but not as I'd hoped. By the third week since I started with him, I knew the exact time when the light from outside began to fade through the funeral home's windows. It was always at this time that the atmosphere changed. Uncle Hank stopped being the serious man in the dark suit and became something else, slower, more dangerous. It was as if the late afternoon turned on a switch inside him. His words became softer, his smile longer, and time passed too slowly. No one noticed. Anyone who walked in saw a clean place, the smell of wilting flowers and classical music on the radio, everything tidy, the curtains impeccable. But behind that back door, where he locked everything, there was no more ceremony, just me and him, and the bodies, the dead women. One of those afternoons, I was cleaning the windows in the front room when he came in with a bag. It was white from the local pharmacy. He said he'd bought something for me. He handed it over without explaining. Inside was a black dress made of cheap fabric, a size small. She said that I was now officially on the team and needed to fit in. I put it on, because not wearing it wasn't an option. And when he saw me wearing it, he muttered something like, "Now that's perfect." From that day on, he didn't let me wear my normal clothes inside. Every time I arrived, I went straight to the changing room. I changed out of my school clothes and into that dark rag. It was like wearing silence itself. It weighed more than it looked. And everyone thought it was beautiful. His niece, so dedicated, helping with the family business, how proud she is. Proud of what? There were days when he said almost nothing. He just told me to sit there and watch. Other times, he'd ask me to hold the girls' cold hands. He said it would maintain respect. I obeyed, out of fear. But also because I began to understand that if I showed any emotion, he might react badly. So I turned to stone, mind distant, body present, and I put up with it. One late afternoon, an old lady arrived. A rare thing because most of the people who appeared with him were young, but this one was different. Her daughter was with her, crying a lot. I remember it because it was a sincere cry, the kind that goes through the wall. He told me to wait in the corridor while he got everything ready, but I listened. I heard him saying things to her that no one should say to a dead person. Then he came to me with a hard, cold expression. He told me to help him comb the lady's hair. He gave me a brush and stood there watching. He didn't say anything, he just watched. I didn't know if it was to see if I was doing it right or to feed off the moment. What put me off that day was the mirror. There was a small mirror on the wall. While I was brushing, I saw my reflection, and it was as if I had looked at myself from the outside for the first time. A girl dressed in black, combing a dead woman's hair under the eyes of a man who was smiling quietly. I saw the absurdity, but I didn't shout, because no one would listen. Sometimes I tried to talk to him about normal things. I'd ask him about my mother, about school, anything to break the heavy atmosphere. He would turn away, change the subject, and always come back to the same point, the importance of our work. He said that the world didn't understand, that we were doing a beautiful job, that not everyone had the courage. I listened quietly, because any response from me could become a problem. One hot September afternoon, he called me earlier than usual. He said he wanted to show me something new. I arrived and saw that the room was different, darker. The lights were off, just a small lamp in the corner. In the center, a body covered in a white sheet, and next to it, a camera. At that moment, my chest froze. He saw my reaction and laughed. He said it was just to document the process, that many professionals did this for studies. But I knew it wasn't a study. It was something else. That camera there wasn't neutral. It was watching, and I began to understand that it wasn't just me who saw it all. He was filming it. Maybe he showed it to others, or watched it later. The idea that more people might be involved terrified me. I tried to leave the room, but he blocked the door with his body. Calmly, without raising his voice, he said that I wasn't ready to leave yet. That the lesson would only end when he decided. I felt the floor disappear, but I stayed. Not out of choice, but out of helplessness. I was no longer in control of myself. Not there. When he turned on the camera, the sound of it clicking was like a shot to my head. I wanted to scream, run, anything. But I just closed my eyes. Pretending not to see was what I did best. That night, my mother had a severe seizure. She woke up in the middle of the night screaming my father's name. I ran into her room, held her hand, and tried to calm her down. She looked at me as if she didn't recognize me. She was calling for someone who wasn't me. I sat on the edge of the bed and cried quietly, because even when I tried to save her, it was as if I had already lost. I spent the night in bed, sitting on the bedroom floor, wondering if there was any way to end it all, to run away. But escape to where? I was a little girl, no one would believe me, and he was Ellington, respected, untouchable. At school, they started to notice that I was acting strange. A teacher commented that I looked pale, tired. She offered to talk to me. I thanked her and lied. I said that my mother was ill and that I was overworked. She believed me because it was easier. Little by little, I became someone else, more closed off, more dry, less of a child. I looked in the mirror and saw nothing, just a body that breathed. But inside, there was no one left, until one day he made a mistake, small but enough. And it was that mistake that gave me the first glimmer that maybe, just maybe, there was a loophole. That day, he forgot to take the key out of the door. It doesn't sound like much, but for me it was a sign. I had already memorized every step of his routine. I knew when he turned on the radio which glove he wore first, even the way he turned the ring on his finger when he was thinking. And that key there, hanging in the lock, made me feel something I hadn't felt for a long time. Space, a gap, a possibility. I didn't do anything at the time. I just looked at it. I memorized it. I put it away like someone who hides a dry match in stormy weather. I carried on as usual with the same neutral face, the same restrained gestures, because any wrong move and he'd get suspicious. And if he did, it was worse. Over the next few days, I started counting the seconds between his arrival and the moment he locked the door. I made a mental note of the time I would have in case he ever forgot again. I planned, without knowing exactly what. All I knew was that I couldn't be a spectator any longer. I had to react, if only once. Meanwhile, the visits to the preparation room continued. Each new body was a sentence. He did everything with a kind of sick reverence, as if he were worshiping, not caring for the deceased. I watched, but inside I was tearing up. With every gesture he made, my stomach churned. Even so, I kept pretending, because I needed to see. I needed to understand how far he would go. Once a young woman arrived, probably in her early 20s. She had drowned. The water had made her skin too pale, her hair stuck to her head. He seemed especially excited that day. He sent me to get a towel, then a brush. He spoke quietly. mumbling things I didn't understand. I knew something heavier was going to happen because he told me to wait outside, but I didn't obey. I stayed behind the door without making a sound, and I listened. And I don't want to repeat what he said, but they were dirty words in the tone of someone who thinks the whole world is asleep. It was as if he was no longer a person. When he sighed loudly as if he had finished something, I felt I had crossed an invisible line, one that couldn't be turned back. That night, I didn't go straight home. I walked. I wandered the streets of the neighborhood aimlessly. My head was throbbing, my feet hurt, but I kept going. The wind whipped my face, and yet the smell of his living room seemed to stick to me. I only stopped when I got close to the school. I sat down on a bench and cried for the first time in weeks. But it wasn't tears of fear, it was anger. A kind of anger that comes from deep inside, from the bottom of my throat, the kind that burns. I started thinking about how to expose him, who I would tell. But then came the questions. Who will believe it? How could I prove it? I was just a little girl who helped her uncle at the funeral home. He was the town's trusted man, the one who took care of the dead, the one who comforted the families. What proof did I have? None. Just my memories, and those nobody wanted to hear. I came home late. My mother was asleep. Her breathing was faint, but she was still there. I approached her slowly, leaning my face against hers. I kept listening to that low, continuous sound, and I thought, if she dies, I'll be alone with him. The thought stopped me in my tracks. I stayed awake until daylight. I didn't have the courage to close my eyes, as if I slept, she could leave without warning. The next morning, routine swallowed me up again. I went to school, looked normal, pretended to be fine. The girls talked about silly things, parties, new shoes, boys from the other class. And I just listened. I didn't feel like taking part anymore. I couldn't fit in there anymore. What kept me standing was the key. That key he forgot once. I started paying more attention to the copies. One day I saw a bundle hanging on the wall in the front room. I wrote down every detail. Where it was, what time he picked it up, how many he used. And when I realized that one of them opened to the back, I started to make a plan. I wasn't going to run away. It was to get in, to open that room when he wasn't there, to see with my own eyes what he kept. That camera he used, could the videos still be there? Was he hiding more? Photos? Files? I needed to know. If I was going to put an end to it, it would have to be with something stronger than words. One Saturday, he left early. He said he was going to the bank. He left me there cleaning the hall as usual, and I went straight to the wall. I grabbed the key. My hands were shaking, heart pounding. When I stuck it in the lock of his room, I almost couldn't turn it because my hand was so sweaty. But turn it did, and the door opened. What I saw there took my breath away. There was no screaming or blood. It was cold, the kind of cold that freezes you to the bone. The room was full of boxes, tapes, a locked cupboard, and in the corner, the camera, on a tripod, as if it had just been used. I walked slowly. Each step made the floorboards creak. I picked up one of the tapes. It had a label on it, Jane, 1972. My stomach turned. I knew that name. She was a city girl who had died of the heart, according to the rumors. I tried to open the cupboard, but the lock was strong. I couldn't. I put everything back the way it was. I left. I locked it. And I wiped the traces with the sleeve of my black dress. I went back to the main room. I stood there sweeping, waiting for him to come back. And when he came in, smiling, asking if everything was all right, I smiled too. But inside, something had changed. Now I knew. I knew what he was keeping. I knew it wasn't just me. And most importantly, I knew that he left clues. That tape, one day someone was going to see it. After that Saturday, I couldn't be the same. I couldn't even pretend. Even when he spoke to me in that sweet, forced way, even when he offered me candy or said that we were building something together, everything inside me turned around. The taste of disgust, anger, impotence, It was like a poison that was slowly seeping through my veins, burning away every bit of my trust in the world. On Monday, when I went back to the funeral home, he was waiting for me in a gown, gloves ready. He said he had a delicate case, a young woman who had died in special circumstances. He didn't explain what it was, and I didn't ask either. I didn't need to. I already knew what he meant. From the way he adjusted the lights, the way he turned on the record player at the lowest volume, the way he pulled back the curtain in the preparation room with that excessive care. I knew his every gesture. I knew when the ritual was going to start. But now I was carrying something he didn't know. I had seen it. I had touched the tapes. I knew it wasn't just some sick game between him and the dead women. There was a record. There was a hiding place. That feeling gave me strength. A small strength, still weak, but alive. And with it came the idea. I started writing everything down in an old notebook I found in my mother's kitchen drawer. I did this at night under the blanket with a weak flashlight wedged between my knees. I wrote down dates, names, what he did, what I saw, what I heard. It was as if, by putting it down on paper, it was no longer mine alone. As if I was sharing it with someone, even if that someone was a dusty notebook. Each line I wrote was a breath of fresh air. At the same time, I started tinkering with little things without him noticing. One day, I moved the ribbon. Another time, I hit a label. Once, I peeked into one of the boxes at the back, covered with a beige sheet. Inside, more recordings, some with handwritten names, others with just codes and dates. It gave me chills to think about what was in there, but that was also where perhaps the only chance of overturning it all lay. At school, I started to observe more, the people, the teachers, even the way the principal spoke to the students. I wanted to find out if there was anyone who could listen without laughing, or without trying to drown it out. A new teacher had recently arrived from another town, full of polite manners and a look that seemed to care. I thought about her. I haven't said anything yet. I just kept an eye on her, because trust, after what I'd experienced, was a rare commodity. At home, my mother was getting worse. She hardly recognized me anymore. Sometimes she called out for my grandmother, who had been dead for years. At other times, she spoke to herself, with her hands in the air, apologizing to someone I didn't know. And still, I stayed there, making watery soup, changing the bedding, combing her weak hair. It was all I had left of her, and perhaps the last thread that kept me from falling apart for good. It was on a muggy evening that something different happened. I arrived at the funeral home, and he wasn't in the main hall. I waited a few minutes, then went to the back. The door to the room where he was making the preparations was ajar. I pushed it carefully, just to call out. But what I saw paralyzed me. He was sitting alone with his back to me, his head bowed, his shoulders hunched, and in front of him, a covered body, as always. But he wasn't doing anything. He just stared. He spoke softly in a tone almost like a prayer. For the first time, he seemed fragile, almost human, almost. But what scared me most was what he said. "They're going to find out, aren't they?" His voice was shaky. "One day someone will see, and it will all be over." My heart raced. Did he know? Had he realized what I'd been doing? I hid quickly and left quietly. I returned to the salon as if I had just arrived. When he came in, acting as usual, with the same smile, I knew I hadn't discovered anything. But the fear, that was already inside him too. That night, I wrote in my notebook until my hand hurt. For the first time, I added a plan. Not just notes, a real idea, a path. I thought about how to take one of the tapes, hide it in my school bag, and take it to the new teacher. Just one. One recording that would be enough to show that he wasn't who everyone thought he was. But how to choose? The chance came on an unexpected day. He left in a hurry in the middle of the afternoon, saying he needed to sort something out at the town hall. He left me alone. I ran to the back room, key in hand. I opened everything. I rummaged through the boxes and chose one with a familiar name tag, Clarissa M., April 73. I remembered Clarissa. The whole town cried when she died. They said it was suicide, but nobody really believed it. I took the tape and put it in the bottom of my backpack. I locked it up. I wiped the traces with my sleeve. My heart almost burst out of my mouth. When he came back, I acted normal. He asked if everything was in order. I nodded, and I pretended, as always. On the way home, I squeezed that backpack like it was a safe. I knew that inside it was a bomb, small, silent, but powerful. The problem was, what to do now? I didn't sleep. I waited for dawn. I got to school early. I went to the teacher's room. I knocked on the door with the tape hidden in my coat pocket. She opened it. She smiled. She asked if I needed any help, and I couldn't say anything. I just looked. She insisted. She wanted to know if everything was all right. I lied. I said I just wanted to ask about an assignment. I went back to the classroom. I spent the whole day with that piece of tape weighing me down. I didn't hand it in. I was scared. But I also realized something important. He wasn't as untouchable as I thought. I was afraid. I knew I could fall. And that gave me strength I didn't know I still had. The tape was hidden for weeks in my backpack. I took it everywhere. I slept with it under my pillow, as if it were a loaded weapon, ready to be used, but which scared me just by touching it. Every time I thought about handing it over, fear swallowed me up. What if he found out? What if no one believed me? What if they called me crazy? During lessons, my mind would wander. The words on the board became blurs. The voices of my classmates seemed distant. It was as if I lived on another plane, floating between the normality of school and the silent horror of the funeral home. When the bell rang, I would rush back to reality, and it reminded me that I was still just a little girl with a secret that was too heavy. The notebook where I wrote everything down was already worn out, full of hasty scribbles, dates, names, codes. That was my map of hell, and yet I was afraid of losing it. I hid it between the linings of my bedroom closet next to the clothes my mother no longer wore. Whenever she had a moment of lucidity, she would ask me if I was all right, and I'd say yes, not because I wanted to lie, but because I knew that telling her would be like shouting at a wall. Uncle Hank continued to act as if nothing was out of place. Every time I arrived at the funeral home, he greeted me with that calculated look, like someone measuring every step. Only now there was a tension there. He suspected something. He didn't say anything, but he looked too much. Sometimes he asked if I had moved anything. He'd say that some tapes were out of order, that documents had gone missing. I pretended to be surprised, and the fear grew a little more. It was on a rainy afternoon that everything started to get out of hand. We were alone. A body had arrived earlier, an elderly woman who had suffered a stroke. While he was making the preparations, he called me over to help with the cloths. Nothing different from usual. Only this time, I dropped the towel, and as I bent down to pick it up, the hidden ribbon fell out of my inside jacket pocket. The sound it made when it hit the floor was small, but to me, it was like an explosion. He turned on the spot. He saw it, and at that moment, I knew he'd understood everything. "What's that?" His voice came low, cutting. "Where did you get that from, Lorraine?" I tried to make up an excuse. I said I'd found it on the floor, that I didn't know what it was. He didn't believe me. He grabbed the tape out of my hand. His eyes were different, dark, not of anger, but of something colder, the coldness of someone who feels control slipping through their fingers. He told me to leave that day. He didn't shout at me. He didn't even threaten me. He just calmly told me that I'd better not come back the next day, and that my mother should rest. He said this, looking straight into my eyes, like someone who tells without telling. I left with my legs shaking, my whole body trembling. The world was spinning around me, and I didn't know what to do. At home, I remained silent. My mother was asleep. The city seemed to stand still, as if it were holding its breath. I sat on the bedroom floor and cried, not for myself, but for what could happen to her. Because now he knew, and a man like him, when cornered, is capable of anything. That night, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I went to my notebook, opened one of the last pages, and began to write a letter to the new teacher. I wrote everything. From day one, no filter. It was my last attempt. If anything happened to me, someone had to know. I signed it with my full name, my mother's name, and the date. I sealed it in an envelope and hid it inside an old book from the school library that I knew no one would take. The book with the blue cover and gold lettering. If everything went wrong, that would be my cry. The next day, I pretended to be ill and didn't go to school. I spent the day at home with my mother, looking after her, but unable to think about anything else. When I heard footsteps at the gate at night, my heart stopped. It was him. Uncle Hank appeared with a cake in his hand. He said he was worried. He wanted to visit my mother, the perfect excuse. She vaguely recognized him, smiled with difficulty. He came in, didn't stay long. He talked as if nothing had happened, but before he left, he touched the back of my neck with his icy hand and said softly, "Be careful with your words, my flower. Sometimes they bury you deeper than a coffin." After that, life became a minefield. I walked like someone stepping on glass. I knew he could do something, but I didn't know when. I began to notice shapes. I felt like someone was following me down the street. The lights in the kitchen began to go out by themselves. The phone rang and no one answered. My mother said it was all in my head, but I knew. I knew he was watching me, that he wasn't going to let it go. But what he didn't know was that what I had already prepared was no longer up to me. The nights became too long. The silence in the house, which before had only been sad, became threatening. I would wake up at the slightest crack, the slightest draft. I was sure he would come, that he would come in smiling as he always did, but with a different kind of intention now, one that didn't just involve lifeless bodies. I began to sleep with a pair of scissors hidden under my mattress, small, old sewing scissors. Not because I thought I could defend myself with it, but because it was all I had. I felt that any protection was better than nothing, and at that point I understood. He was too dangerous to rely on luck. During the day, I walked as if I were surrounded by abysses. Fear was a constant presence, clinging to me like a shadow. I avoided empty roads, no longer accepted help from anyone, even distrusted the letter carrier. It was as if his eyes were everywhere. I returned to school after 2 days at home. I carried the envelope with the letter in my backpack, and before my first lesson, I went straight to the library. I took the book I'd hidden everything in and left it open on the table, like someone who just reads. I waited for the librarian to get distracted and slipped the envelope between the pages, but this time, I didn't leave it in the same place. I put it in the center, marking it with a loose leaf to draw attention to it. It was all I could do. The new teacher, Mrs. Thompson, called me after class. She wanted to know if everything was okay, if I needed to talk. I stood there, not knowing what to say. I was short of words. I had the feeling that any misplaced phrase could be heard by him, even from far away. So I shook my head, thanked him, and left quickly. But deep down, I let out a look, a silent request, and I think she saw it. That week, everything got worse. The phone rang 3 times in the early hours of the morning, just one ring, always at the same time, 2:17 a.m. The first time, I thought it was a hoax. The second time, fear woke me up before it rang. The third time, I got up before it rang. He wanted me to know he was there, that he could see everything, that he could get inside my head even without opening the door. I went back to the funeral home 2 days later. This time, I went in without knocking. He wasn't in the hall, nor in the back. The key to the main room was in the lock, just like the first time, and the door ajar. I ran my eyes, heart racing. Inside, everything looked the same. The low lights, the table in the center, the cupboards intact, except there was something new, a black unmarked box on the floor next to the filing cabinet. I knelt down and opened it slowly. Inside, piles of envelopes, women's names, dates, some with photos. My hand was shaking so much that I almost dropped it. I picked one up at random. It was of a girl called Pauline. Inside, there was a picture taken from above, clearly from the preparation room. She was lying down. He was next to her, and what I saw there took my breath away. It was him, with his hand touching in a way. I can't write it down, but it was there. It registered. There was no denying it. I stuffed the envelope into my backpack. I locked the room. I walked out without looking back. The wind in my face stung like a knife. I knew it was all or nothing now. That evening, I went to the teacher's house. I knocked on the door with my heart in my throat. She opened in surprise, but not with suspicion. She just asked if everything was all right. I stretched out my backpack. I said I needed to talk, alone, urgently. We sat down in the living room. She offered me tea. I refused. My hands were sweaty. My voice choked. I took the envelope and showed it to her. She opened it, looked at it, and was silent for long seconds. Her face changed. It went from amazement to disgust, then anger. This is real? I nodded. She took a deep breath, picked up the phone, but didn't call. She said she knew someone in the prosecutor's office, that she had to show him, that it couldn't be just anyone. I left not knowing if I'd done the right thing, but I did. It was the only thing that mattered. I came home exhausted, as if I had carried the world on my back. I slept with the door locked, scissors in hand, but this time, I didn't have nightmares. The next day, a different kind of movement took over the city. Ellington's Memorial Funeral Home was closed. A sign on the door said, "For maintenance," but everyone knew that wasn't it. Word began to spread. There was an investigation, a secret one, but real. I pretended not to know anything. I carried on going to school, looking after my mother, walking the streets as if I were still just that sad, quiet girl. But inside, something had changed. A weight had come off, and in its place, there was a certainty. He'd found out. Of course he found out. He knew who gave him away. I knew who exposed him. 3 days later, I received a letter. No sender as usual, but with the same kind of writing. Short. Director. You've killed more than my name. Now wait. I burned the paper in the yard. Watching the flame devour those words, I felt fear. Yes, but also relief. Because now he couldn't pretend anymore. He was cornered. And a cornered man is dangerous, but also predictable. That night, the phone rang. I picked it up. No one answered. I left it on the hook. He didn't need to talk. He'd already said everything with that disgusting warning. 2 weeks passed. The case became the talk of the town. People said it was a lie, that it was jealousy, that someone wanted to bring down a good man. Others, quieter, began to reminisce of old stories. Women who had passed through and then disappeared. People who died and were never properly veiled. Doubts began to arise. And where there is doubt, there is fire. The teacher discreetly called me into her classroom. She said that the prosecutor's office had taken the documents, that other evidence had come to light, and that now, officially, he was being investigated for very serious crimes. I understood what she couldn't say out loud. For the first time, I felt that I wasn't alone. On the way home, I saw his car stopped on the corner. He was in it, watching. But this time, I didn't look away. I stared, long, steady, as if to say, it's over. From that day on, nothing seemed to have any ground anymore. The air in the city became heavy as I passed. The glances came short, clipped, as if everyone knew but no one wanted to comment. Some of the neighbors whispered to each other when they saw me on the street. Others shifted on the sidewalk. It wasn't anger. It was fear. The kind of fear that only arises when someone does what everyone pretends not to see. At home, my mother was getting worse by the minute. She barely opened her eyes. Sometimes she wouldn't say a word for days. I looked after her with all the affection I had left. I made broth, combed her fine hair, told her stories from childhood as if she could still hear. Maybe she would. But she was long gone. Very far away. Further away every day. At school, Ms. Thompson protected me as best she could. She didn't say anything in public, but she sent me notes. Keep going. They're listening. You're not alone. Small gestures that held my soul in place. I thanked them with my eyes. It couldn't be more than that. The news of the investigation hit like a bombshell, not just because of its seriousness, but because it involved someone who for years had been seen as a pillar of the community, the man who looked after the dead with respect, as they said. The same man who, behind the curtains, violated everything that was most sacred. Testimonies began to emerge. People who had previously kept quiet now spoke out. Mothers who had lost daughters, widows who were surprised at the delay in releasing the bodies, boys who delivered flowers and noticed strange movements in the back room. No one was sure, but everyone suspected. They just lacked the courage. Until now, he knew the noose was tightening. One day, he tried to approach the school. I saw his car on the corner. It didn't come down. He just stood there like an old predator, watching for prey that had already escaped. I stood at the gate. I stared. He swerved first. That was enough to keep me on my feet. In the evening, the phone rang again. Just once, always the same time. I got up and unplugged it. The sound burned my ears, a reminder that he still existed, but I couldn't control myself any longer. One morning, a car pulled up in front of the funeral home. 2 men in suits got out, briefcases in hand, firm looks on their faces. They entered without haste. I watched from afar, behind the school wall. He didn't appear. He disappeared. They said he was traveling on business. The most lame excuse anyone could give. That same day, I received another letter, unsigned as usual, but different. It was a short note written in a hurry. You won. You. That's all. 2 words, but with the weight of a world. I tore it up on the spot, not because it hurt, but because I didn't need it anymore. He admitted it, not to justice, but to me. And that, my dear, was the first time I felt peace. The next few days were confusing. People trying to understand, others pretending to be surprised, some still defending it, saying it was a setup, that Uncle Ellington was a good man, that girl just wanted attention. But I didn't care anymore, because whoever needed to know already knew. I was called to testify. The prosecution wanted details. I sat in that cold room with a glass of water in my hand and told them everything. No crying, no screaming. I was firm. Name by name, date by date. The notebook helped. The memories were all there. The prosecutor, a gray-haired man with a tired face, listened without blinking. At the end, he just said, "You were brave." Courage wasn't what I felt. It was something else, a mixture of exhaustion and anger, relief and pain. But I nodded. There was no going back. The city began to divide. Some wanted justice. Others preferred to forget. They said that too much scandal tarnished the town's name, as if what he had done wasn't the real stain, as if silence were cleansing. I walked to the old preparation room a few days later. The police had sealed it off, yellow tape on the door, new padlock. That smell still hung in the air, strong, a smell you can't forget, of death, yes, but also of horror and shame. I stopped there, in front of the door. I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes. I felt the memories coming like an avalanche, the wet cloth, the noise of the camera, his voice whispering those things. I opened my eyes. I touched the lock. It was cold. I left without looking back. For the first time, my back felt light. On the way, I picked up the old notebook. I went to the town's lake. I sat on the edge. I watched the ducks swimming, children running, people living. I took a deep breath, opened my notebook, tore out sheet after sheet. I threw them into the lake. One by one, every line written there went away with the water, not because I wanted to forget, but because now I didn't have to remember on my own. The lake swallowed the last pages calmly, as if it understood what it was taking away. Each leaf sank slowly, disappearing in the reflection of the gray sky. I sat there for hours, in no hurry, just breathing. For the first time in years, the pain seemed to have left my chest a little. It was still there, but it was less, like a muffled sound behind a closed door. When I got home, my mother was asleep. The The room smelled of medicine, forgotten tea, old things. I stroked her forehead and spoke quietly, not knowing if she could hear. I told her that he was being investigated, that finally someone was listening, that the world was beginning to see. She didn't answer. She just turned her face away, perhaps out of tiredness. Maybe because she didn't want to remember. The next few weeks dragged by. The buzz didn't stop. Reports began to come out. Some more timid, others sensationalist, none with my name. There was no need. Everyone already knew. They just didn't say it out loud. Mothers whispered in the markets. The teachers looked at each other in the classrooms. And me, I walked among them with my head held high, not out of pride, but out of survival. One day, I was called back by the prosecutor's office. They wanted to confirm details, clarify dates, review reports. I knew everything by heart. Every night, every body, every gesture. I haven't forgotten a thing. Never. The mind keeps what the heart can't carry. The prosecutor said that the case was moving forward, that the charges would soon be formalized. I felt relief, yes, but also a strange anguish, because along with justice came the fear that he would disappear into the world like a rat fleeing a fire. One clear morning, I woke up to a note under the door, quickly written in blue pen. They're coming to get me. No signature, of course, but I didn't need one. I kept the paper in my locked drawer. It was as if he knew the end was near and wanted to let me know, not to apologize, but to show that he was still ahead, still in control, if only with his words. That night, I slept badly. The wind hit the windows hard. My mother mumbled disconnected sentences in the next room. Every noise made me get up, checking the lock, peeking through the curtain, checking the doorknob. When the sun finally came out, I was exhausted. 2 cars pulled up in front of the funeral home shortly after midday. 3 men got out. No one shouted. No scandal. He walked out, head down, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't resist. He didn't even try, as if he had already accepted it, as if it were the last act of a play he himself had written. The city was divided for good. Some applauded. Others accused him. They said it was an exaggeration, that it was a setup, that it was all an invention. But I didn't care anymore, because now he was gone, far away, and that alone changed everything. In the days that followed, I avoided going out. I wanted peace, silence. I needed to learn to live without fear, without waiting for the door to slam, without listening to the record player playing slow music in the back of my mind, to learn that there was more to the world. One afternoon, Professor Thompson showed up at my door. She brought flowers, daisies. She said they had been planted by her grandmother. Simple, beautiful. She handed them over, smiling. And in that smile, I saw truth. I invited her in. We spoke briefly. She said it would be a long process, but the worst was over. That now it was about healing. Healing is not forgetting. I discovered that early on. You can't erase what you've lived through. You can't undo what you've done. But you can move on, with your eyes open, with a wounded soul, but standing up. And that's what I've started to do. I organized my books, tidied my room, cleaned the kitchen. Simple things, but they made sense again. Starting again isn't grandiose. It's discreet, almost invisible. And sometimes it starts with a clean plate in the sink. With my mother, everything went slowly. She had an improvement, the kind that cheers you up just to throw you off. She said my name again. She called me my little girl, just like when I was little. We sat together on the balcony. We stared at the sky, in silence, the good one, the one that doesn't hurt. I went back to school feeling lighter. I still felt the stares, but they didn't bother me, because something new was growing inside me, a kind of strength that can't be explained. And that, even after everything, still insisted on keeping me alive. The next few days were silent, but a different kind of silence to the one I knew. It was no longer the silence of fear, of the choked secret, of the locked door. It was the kind that comes after the storm, when everything is in pieces and yet the wind blows lightly. In the city, people were still divided. Some crossed paths with me in the street and pretended not to see. Others looked at me with a respect that hadn't existed before, as if they had finally seen who I was, or perhaps what I had been through. They never said it out loud, but they didn't need to. On my way home from school, I'd pass the closed funeral home with its sign covered in black tarpaulin, and I'd feel a bitter mixture. That place saw me grow up in the worst way. I learned to pretend there, to smile out of obligation, to exist as a shadow. But now it was empty, sealed off, and there would be no one else going through what I went through. That was enough. At home, my mother got worse again. The improvement was just a blip. She spent most of her time sleeping. She hardly ate. She spoke in sentences with no beginning. Sometimes she called out for my father, who disappeared decades ago. At other times, he spoke to me as if I were still 5 years old. She held my hand as if it was hers that needed protecting. One cold afternoon, she called me by the nickname she only used when everything was still good, Lolo. Her voice came out weak but firm. I sat down next to her and took her hand. "Are you all right now, child?" I shook my head, even though I wasn't sure. She smiled with watery eyes. After that, she didn't speak again. That night, while she was asleep, I wrote a letter. Not to anyone specific, it was for me. A letter that I needed to read one day, when I thought I'd forgotten everything. I wrote about the girl who walked into a room one day and never came out the same, about the courage that took years to be born, and about the man who swore no one would believe her, and he was wrong. I cried as I wrote, not out of pain, but because I understood that that version of me was still there, somewhere, alive, waiting for me to see it with compassion. A few days later, I received a notice from the prosecutor's office. The case was moving forward. New evidence emerged. Other victims appeared. Different stories, but with the same script. People who had also had their childhoods torn apart, their youth stained, their souls ripped out little by little. And as I listened, I realized that I wasn't alone. I never was. One name caught my attention. It belonged to a girl who now lived in another state. But at the time, she had lost her sister, who had passed away at the funeral home. She described things that only someone who had also lived through it would understand. Words with the same bitter taste. Details that coincided with those I had kept for so long. The prosecutor's office organized a meeting between some witnesses. It wasn't a trial yet, but an attempt to join forces. I went. I entered the room with sweaty hands and a racing heart. There were 3 women, all older. None spoke at first. We were silent for minutes, until one of them, with short hair, said, "I thought it was just me." At that moment, we all started to cry. No more words were needed. We were there, alive and kicking, even after everything. On my way home, I stopped in front of the school. I went inside. I went to the library. I picked up the book where I had hidden the first note. It was still there. Blue cover, gold lettering. I opened to page 147, where I had left the note years ago. The page I had put it on no longer existed, but I smiled anyway. That had been my cry, and somehow it had worked. Professor Thompson found me there, sitting on the floor between the bookshelves. She smiled and approached me. "You've changed a lot, Lorraine." I stared at her. I thought about everything that came after the day I dropped the tape on the floor. Every step, every fall, every attempt to make me doubt myself. But I had won, and not alone. "I just got tired of pretending it didn't hurt," I replied. She nodded and hugged me. We didn't say another word. That night I wrote again. Not in the old notebook, on loose pages in calm handwriting. It was a different Lorraine now, stronger, more whole. And in that writing, I recorded not what had destroyed me, but what I had regained. Strength, the truth, the voice. My mother left 3 weeks later, quietly, without pain. In the early hours of the morning, while I was asleep on the sofa. When I woke up, I knew right away. The house was different, emptier. I stayed by her side until the ambulance arrived. And when they took her body away, for the first time, I didn't feel terror at seeing someone go. She rested, and I stayed to carry on. My mother's wake was simple, just as she would have liked. No expensive flowers, no beautiful speech, just a few neighbors, a few acquaintances, and Professor Thompson, who held my hand the whole time. They looked at me with a mixture of respect and curiosity, as if they were still trying to understand where so much strength came from in a girl who was barely 15. But strength, my dear, doesn't come from nothing. It is born in the dark, grows in pain, and feeds on what we swallow quietly. And I had already swallowed more than I should have. We buried my mother next to her grandmother in a corner of the cemetery where the wind blew the strongest. Then I went home alone. I sat on the kitchen chair and watched the clock on the wall tick. Tick-tock, tick-tock. As if time wanted to say, now it's just you. I spent the first night sleepless, not from fear, but of emptiness. The house seemed bigger. The silence was more honest. I cried little by little, lightly, without scandal, like someone making room to start again. In the days that followed, I took care of the paperwork, the death certificate, the bureaucracy. It all seemed small in the face of what I had already faced. Signing documents never scared me. Living did. But now, even that seemed less burdensome. I got a call from the prosecutor's office. The trial would be scheduled. The date was still undefined, but it was close. The evidence was all gathered, the testimonies organized, the victims protected by law, and him arrested. Finally, no bail, no habeas corpus, no provisional release. Arrested. When I hung up, I looked in the living room mirror. I saw a girl with a tired face, deep circles under her eyes, but a strange sparkle in her eyes. It wasn't joy, it was certainty that no matter how much life had taken from me, I was still here. One afternoon, I went to school. I asked to use the computer room. I wanted to write. I wanted to record everything, not for the police, not for the prosecution, but for myself. I started with what I remember from the first time he took me to the funeral home. His hand on the back of my neck, the smell of formaldehyde, the sound of the lock turning, the words he used to justify what he was doing. It all came back, but now, when I wrote it down, it didn't hurt as much. It was like removing splinters from an old wound. It bleeds a little, but it cleanses. I wrote for days. I don't know if anyone will ever read it. Maybe they will. Maybe it will become something bigger, a warning, a cry to other girls who, like me, have been silenced under the pretext of obedience, tradition, family. With time, the noise of the city returned to normal. Children running around in the square, church bells ringing, girls coming and going with market bags. The funeral home changed owners. A young man, newly arrived, bought the building. He painted the walls. He changed the name. Eternal Peace. Ironic, but necessary. I avoided going there for weeks. Then one day I made up my mind. I crossed the street slowly. I stopped on the sidewalk. I stared at the new facade, the clean windows, the shiny sign. Everything was different. But inside, there was still a piece of me. I closed my eyes. I remembered the cold room, the camera on the tripod, the bodies, that girl dressed in black, holding the cold hand of someone who could no longer call for help. I took a deep breath. I smelled the street, the bread from the bakery next door, the gasoline from the station on the corner, the smell of life. I opened my eyes and left, without looking back, because I didn't need to anymore. I went back home. I made coffee. I ate hot bread with butter, just like my mother used to make. I turned on the radio. It was playing old music, the kind she liked. I smiled. I cried. But this time, for a different reason. Not because I remembered what I'd lost, but because, despite everything, I stayed. Today, at 82, people still ask me how I did it, how I survived. I don't know the right answer. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't fate. It was stubbornness. It was the will not to let it define who I was. I was a daughter, an orphan, a shadow. I was a meat doll in the hands of a sick man. I was silence, then fury, and finally, courage. Telling this here, now, is more than an outburst. It's a warning. For you who are listening and think there's no way out, there is. But sometimes it's narrow, dark, and full of thorns. And yet you get through. Scratched? Yes. But you get through. If you've made it this far, please leave a like. Every like is like a hug for this old woman who was once just a scared little girl at the back of a cold room. Tell me where you're hearing this story from. My heart is light today, but don't forget, lightness can also come after a storm.